الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Praise Allah, the Lord of everything in existence, and we ask Him to bless the Messenger Muhammad, to elevate his mention and to shower him with grace, along with his family and his righteous followers until the last day, as he did with Ibrahim, his family and righteous followers in the past. Welcome to IOK's extended Taraweeh program. And I know it's very late, but inshallah the objective is to try to cover some of the lessons that we can extract from the recitation that we heard tonight and also in the last few nights. So basically I have 20 minutes. So what I was hoping to do was cover all the recitation from the beginning. So this is our third night, correct? Praying Taraweeh. So in bullet points, just going over basically what we read very, very quickly, inshaAllah ta'ala. So in the first section of the Quran, the first juz of the Quran, many people actually overlook that the first chapter is Fatiha. So whenever we want to do reflections, we start with Baqarah and what it covers. But we skip Fatiha, which is the beginning of the Quran. It's called the opening of the Quran. It's called Ummul Kitab. It has many, many names. It's called As-Salah because Allah calls it Salah in the Quran. It's also a conversation that a person has with his Lord while they perform the ritual. Now what's interesting about Fatiha is also it's a cure, and the scholars say that Fatiha is an introduction to the rest of the book. It's an introduction, a preface to the rest of the book. The rest of the Quran is an explanation of Fatiha. The Quran covers four main themes. It speaks about Allah, it speaks about the next life, it speaks about rules and regulations of this life, and it speaks about stories of past nations, whether those who believed or those who disbelieved. And Fatiha covers those subjects. It speaks about Allah by praising Him in the beginning. It speaks about the rules and regulations by saying, we worship you and we seek your assistance alone. And also it speaks about the next life, speaking about Allah being the master of the Day of Judgment. And it covers a brief intro about the stories of people, the believers, the righteous, those who follow the right path, and also those who stayed away from the right path, gained Allah's anger or gained misguidance due to their own misdeeds. So that's what covers what's covered in Surah Al-Fatiha. Again, praising Allah, complimenting Him, honoring Him, and this is something that Allah loves. Speaking about intention and being pure and sincere in our worship and relationship with Allah, seeking His help and His help alone. Speaking about guidance and what is the reality of guidance. I know that one time we had a khutbah here in IOK about Al-Fatiha, guide us. This prayer that really is the punchline of the whole Fatiha. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. Finally, the people that are prevented from guidance. So Allah shows us the path of those who He's pleased with, and that's the path of guidance. He doesn't just say, ask for guidance. He also gives us role models, the prophets and their righteous followers. And He gives us role models to stay away from, those who have stayed away from the guidance of the prophets. Then we begin with Surah Al-Baqarah. Al-Baqarah gets its name, the cow, from an event that takes place, and we'll talk about it briefly later on. In the beginning of the surah, it covers the three categories of people when it comes to belief. Believers who have proper belief, disbelievers who don't believe, and hypocrites who actually externally say they believe, but in their hearts is disbelief. So they're kind of trying to deceive. And Allah speaks at great length about the hypocrites in particular. So the believers, they have a few verses, the disbelievers, a few verses, but then an extended section about the hypocrites and their descriptions. The reason behind these things is so we can be amongst the believers and we stay away from actions that will make us amongst the disbelievers or actions that would make us from the hypocrites. Then Allah speaks to us about the story of Adam. Our father Adam, the first man, the one that Allah placed on this earth and made him in charge of this earth and made him basically guide his children and his progeny. And what we want to do when it comes to the story of Adam is to try to be like our father Adam. Our father Adam, when he made a mistake, he admitted his guilt, he confessed his sin, and he asked his Lord for forgiveness. So we want to be a son of a man, son of Adam, not a son of a gun. Son of a devil. The devil blamed Allah. He didn't confess his sin. He says, you made me do it, you're guilty, and I'm not going to admit my mistake. So we want to be like our father Adam, and we don't want to be like the devil. Then Allah starts speaking at length about the children of Israel. The children of Israel are the children of the prophet Jacob, Yaqub alayhi salam, peace and blessings be upon him. And this was a very special family because they were the believers in their generation. They submitted to Allah and they were the Muslims. So the reason we talk about them is not particularly for their race or their ethnic identity, but because they had a covenant and a deal with Allah that we submit to you, we follow your commandments. So time and again this story is mentioned throughout the Quran. The point behind the story being mentioned is not so we can point the finger. Oh, look at that community, look how bad they are. It's actually for us to reflect over ourselves. Are we following their lead as we surely do, or are we following the lead of the messengers? So it speaks about a group of Bani Israel in particular, which became known as the Jews, the Jewish community. And it speaks about their relationship with revelation. How did they interact with revelation? And how did they interact with the messengers? What was their attitude like? So the point behind this is, are we like these people, or are we like what Allah wants of us to be? Then Allah speaks about the story of the cow. So the story of the cow, what happens is, there was a murder that took place, a homicide, and they didn't know who the guilty party was. So Allah commanded them, kill a cow. And the messenger, Musa alayhi salam, was the one responsible for relaying that command. Kill a cow. They decided to hesitate. What color is the cow? How old is the cow? Tell us more about the cow. And basically, they didn't want to implement the command of God. The point was, you find a cow, you kill a cow, you take a piece of the cow, you hit the dead body wakes up from death and says, this is the person that killed me. And that actually did take place. So they found the solution of the crime through following the command of Allah. Now the summary of that story is the danger and to warn us from ever hesitating when it comes to the commands of Allah. When Allah commands, the believer should say, Sami'na wa ata'na. We hear and we obey. The people of the cow, they said, we hear and we disobey. That's the difference. So believers listen and implement the command. Those who have problems in their hearts, they reject and they rebel. And what that tells us also in this story is that if a person hesitates in implementing the commands of Allah, the result in that is that the heart will become hard and harsh. And Allah describes these hearts as harder than the rocks, harder than mountains. We ask Allah to make us people who possess soft hearts and people who are away from hard and harsh hearts. Then Allah speaks about how that community dealt with the messengers of Allah, how they would reject some of the messengers because they don't follow their desires. And they even murdered some of the messengers. But they didn't just hate the human messengers of God, they hated the angels as well. Especially Gabriel alayhi salam, they said that he made a mistake. He came to the wrong family. He chose a prophet from the Ishmaelites instead of following or choosing the final messenger from their own family. Allah then speaks about how dangerous it is to prevent people from remembering Allah in the houses that are established for the worship of Allah. This is one of the greatest sins. The objective behind the mosques is to remember Allah, to worship Him, to have fraternity and fellowship, and to obey Allah together. Everything else goes outside the mosque or outside the places of worship. And then Allah speaks about the holy sanctuary, Al-Masjid Al-Haram, which is in Mecca. Who built it? Why was it built? And how was it built? And that's a great story for us as well. And that is mentioned again in our recitation tonight. The second juz' speaks about, again, a continuation of the Jewish community, how they had a problem with the direction of the prayer being changed. In the beginning of Islam, when Quran first was revealed, Allah commanded the Muslims and Muhammad the Messenger to face Jerusalem in Salah. Although he was living in Mecca, he would place the Kaaba in front of him, but Jerusalem is beyond that. And basically the direction of the prayer was Jerusalem, the mosque in Jerusalem. And that continued to be the case after the migration to Medina for basically a year and a little bit. And then Allah changed the direction of the prayer to Mecca. When that happened, that particular community which was supposed to accept the message started mocking the believers. Oh, you guys are making games with the prayer. One day you face the north, one day you face the south. So Allah is telling them that basically the virtue is in obeying Allah. The virtue is not what direction you go by. Virtue and honor is if you obey Allah and you implement His commands. And then Allah speaks to us about purification of the soul. That is what really matters. Having proper beliefs, having proper actions oversees the trivial matters of which direction you face. And again, that's something for us to reflect on. It's not just to have dialogue and debate with people outside of our faith tradition, but also for us as Muslims. What really matters, although they're all important, the direction you face is a condition of salah. But what truly matters is the faith, the belief that you have, and the actions that you prove your faith with. Then Allah speaks to us about the command of fasting. And this is the only time where fasting is explicitly mentioned in a big passage. The month of Ramadan is mentioned by name in this particular passage. This is the month that the Quran was revealed in. Allah speaks about the regulations of fasting. What happens if you're sick? What happens if you're traveling? How do you make up the days? So this is a very important section for us to reflect on throughout this month. It's less than a page in Surah Al-Baqarah, but it's something to go back to constantly to get the most out of the fasting experience. Then Allah speaks about some of the regulations of another pillar of Islam, Hajj, the pilgrimage. And in this particular chapter in Baqarah, when Allah speaks about Hajj, the pilgrimage, He speaks about the actions and the rituals. He doesn't speak much about the spiritual matters of the Hajj. That is reserved for a latter chapter called the chapter of Hajj. Surah Al-Hajj later on. If Allah gives us an opportunity, we should discuss that when it's the time to do so. So Surah Al-Hajj speaks about the spiritual aspects of the pilgrimage. Baqarah speaks about the physical rituals of the pilgrimage. Then Allah speaks about a lot of the rules and the regulations related to marriage, divorce, which is considered family law, also breastfeeding and nursing. It speaks about how all these regulations are connected to taqwa. Taqwa is also the objective behind fasting. So the point is to constantly be aware of Allah, watching Allah, the fact that doing muraqabah. Muraqabah is a spiritual state of constantly being aware that Allah is watching me and that I am mindful of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah is telling us all these regulations of Islam, the objective behind them is that you're mindful and conscious of your Lord. Then Allah speaks to us about how connected and intertwined the rules and the regulations of the family are to belief in the next life. And the point behind that is when you believe in the next life, you will not oppress your family members. You won't oppress your wife, you won't oppress your husband, you won't oppress your children, you won't oppress your parents, you won't oppress your relatives, because there is an afterlife. If you do wrong here, maybe human justice won't get you, but in the next life, divine justice will. So Allah connects family rules with the afterlife. Then Allah speaks to us about a story of an army, and basically the story of David, King David, and Goliath, and how there was a mighty army and some of the people were hesitant from fighting them. But Allah said that if you're patient and you persevere, that's what will give you victory, even if your numbers are a few. So people always talk about, how can we ever have victory and how can we defeat our enemies? In Islam and our belief system, it's not the numbers, it's not the tools, it's not the weaponry, it's patience, perseverance, faith in Allah, and obedience to His commands. That's the way towards getting victory. And it's not simply numbers, because you can have millions of people, but if they're not united on the mission of obedience to Allah, they're really useless. Then we move on to number 3, section number 3, al-Juz' al-Thalith. It's got the greatest ayah in the Quran. This ayah is Ayat al-Kursi, 255 of Ayat al-Baqarah, of Surah al-Baqarah. Why is it great? We should reflect over it. Basically, it introduces who Allah is to us. This is Allah introducing Himself to His creation. After this ayah, there's 3 stories that are mentioned. So we should go back and reflect over them. I don't have time to go over everything, so it's just bullet points. Then speaking about giving a good loan, something called qard hasan. So in Islam, loans are not interest based. They're interest-free loans, and they're called a beautiful loan because you're lending to Allah. And basically, Allah is encouraging us to give in charity as well, and telling us that the devil is the one that promises us poverty. He says, don't give charity. If you give charity, you'll become poor. Then Allah speaks and warns from usury, from interest, from unlawful financial transactions. And He says that this is equivalent to waging war on Allah and His Messenger. You definitely don't want to wage war on Allah and His Messenger. Then Allah speaks to us in the longest ayah of the Quran, a whole page, about loans and how it's supposed to be documented and recorded and how you're supposed to have witnesses. And this tells us that Islam took great care about financial matters. So Islam is not simply a spiritual experience. You sit in the mosque and you meditate. Islam is about family, as we discussed. It's about economics, as we're talking about right now. It's about politics. It's about dealing with others and so forth. Islam is a complete way of life. Then we begin the beginning of Ali Imran. Ali Imran, very interesting. So Al-Baqarah speaking for the most part about the children of Israel, the Jewish community. Ali Imran happens to be the grandfather of Jesus the Christ. So this is the father of Maryam, the father of Mary. May Allah have blessings and peace on all of these individuals. And the beginning of it says that the Quran is a criterion between good and bad, between truth and falsehood, and that Allah will not accept any other way except the way to submit to Him. So everything else in life is a man-made religion. The only divine religion is Islam, the way of submission and obedience to Allah. Then Allah speaks to us about the story of the mother of Mary, how she had an intention, a pure intention before the baby came into existence, and how her intention affected the upright raising and upbringing of her child Maryam, and how Allah protected her. Throughout her life, she was protected, and she became a sign for all of humanity. Then Allah speaks about the fact that Musa, Moses, Isa, Jesus, and Muhammad, alayhi salatu wasalam, may Allah bless them all and grant them peace, they all followed the same way of worshiping one God and staying away from associating partners with Him. Then Allah speaks to us about how do you look at societies. When you critique people, societies, groups of people, the way you do it is you never stereotype. And stereotyping is bad, even if you're stereotyping your enemy. It's not proper. Allah says, He gives us the idea of how some of the people of the book are trustworthy, how they're upright, and how some of them are not trustworthy. So never stereotype. Don't say, these people from that part of the world are terrible. This color, this race is terrible. Don't stereotype. That's not an Islamic way. The fourth section, which is the final section that we just concluded with, tells us about how the first house of worship established for obedience to Allah was the one in Mecca. And basically that's one of the evidences for Hajj and for it being one of the most important pillars in Islam. Then Allah speaks to us about being united on truth and on worshiping Him, and not to be divided and have differences of opinion amongst us. Having differences of opinion is fine as long as it does not break off our brotherhood, because human beings have different minds. That's fine. But the point is we're supposed to be united on the larger objectives of our religion. Then Allah speaks to us about the great status of commanding good and forbidding evil, and that it's more important in the order that Allah mentions it in. When He says you're the best nation, He says you command good, you forbid evil, and you believe in Allah. So in the order, the chronological order, He put commanding good, forbidding evil before belief in Allah. Although they all go hand in hand, they're all intertwined. And that's basically what makes this community an honored community. It's not a community of God's chosen people, so if our people do something wrong, we just overlook it and we don't speak about it. No, we're supposed to command good and forbid evil at all times, even if it's against ourselves or our family members. Then Allah tells us about being careful of who you keep as your intimate friends. Who's your inner circle? Who's your network of friends and people? Be careful of bad peers, because peer pressure is true. And peer pressure is whether they're good friends or bad friends. They'll pull you wherever they're going. So a good friend will pull you to the mosque, and a bad friend will pull you to the club. It depends. You choose who you want. But Allah is telling us, be careful of having bad companions. Then for a large part of this chapter, Allah speaks about the battle of Uhud, What's important about the Quran is to take it in context. So it's very important to study the Quran with the Prophet's biography, with seerah. Because the Quran was revealed over a period of 23 years and it came discussing matters that were experienced by the Prophet in the early community. So in order for us to truly appreciate the Quran, we should have a study of the seerah with it. So it speaks about how terrible sins are and that sins are a reason for defeat. And basically the companions, they disobeyed one command of the Prophet and it caused them a great catastrophe. Some of the top companions were martyred. And then Allah speaks about the negative consequences of sins. Again, He mentions usury, interest. He also mentions being materialistic and loving this life. Then Allah speaks about some of the descriptions of the righteous people. And basically the point, whenever Allah describes the righteous, while you read, you should say, "Oh Allah, make me amongst them." But also reflect over these characteristics. Don't just have wishful thinking. Make me amongst them, but I'm not going to do anything to become righteous. No, make me amongst them and help me to implement their characteristics in my life. Then finally, actually right before that, some of the contradictions of, again, the children of Israel and how they dealt with prophets and revelation. And finally, the last about 10 or 15 verses of Ali Imran, it's got great virtue. The Prophet ﷺ, when he would wake up at night, he would look up on the heavens and he would recite these last verses. In the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of night and day are great signs for those who have intellect. Those who remember Allah standing and sitting and on their sides. And they say, "Oh our Lord, you have not created this in foolishness. Save us from the fire," and so on and so forth. The Prophet would say this whenever he would wake up. So this is one of the supplications of waking up at night. So it's good for us to reflect over the meanings in there. And then basically that's the conclusion of our recital for tonight. And it ended with a command of Allah, "O you who believe, isbiru, be patient, wasabiru, be perpetuous in patience, persevere, warabitu, stay firm, wattaqullah, have taqwa of Allah." Taqwa is to prevent ourselves, to take preventive measures from Allah's punishment by doing what He commands and staying away from what He forbids. And that way we will get His pleasure and His paradise. We ask Allah for His blessings, for His pleasure and for His paradise. We ask Him to help us to worship Him, to remember Him, and to be grateful to Him. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. I think I've taken a bit more than 20 minutes, but I was told if you have any questions you can ask, since this is an extended session. And if you don't have any questions, then go home and sleep so you can wake up for suhoor. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. We ask you, Allah, to bless the Messenger Muhammad and to shower him with grace and to make us from his righteous followers and to make us in his companionship in the next life in the highest gardens of paradise. Fil Firdaus al-A'la. Ameen. So any questions? Going once? Going twice? Sold. Arshi bay. You got any questions? Okay, alhamdulillah. طيب. May Allah reward you all, accept from you, protect you and preserve you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.